real deals in real estate. Welcome to the Real Deal Podcast with Todd Hearn.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Real Deal Podcast with Todd Hearn. Today, I got a special guest. I'm really excited to have one of my friends here. It's going to be a little bit different than what we've been doing because it's getting into the football season. So guess what? We're going to shift over to football a little bit. I love football, as you can tell with my background right here. You know, I can't tell you what team I'm probably for, but I guess you can figure it out. But anyway, today I have with me a good friend of mine that is no stranger to the microphone at all. He's a TV star a little bit too. Some of you may recognize him and from several Last Chance U's episodes and stuff like that. He's also the Sports Director at WFCA Radio. He's on the MSU radio broadcast team, and he does some play-by-play for Mississippi State. He does play-by-play for East Mississippi Community College football, and he's the color analyst for the SEC Network at Mississippi State. Freelance color sideline reporter for Gridiron Sports Network Radio. And today we're going to have Jason Crowder. How are you doing, Jason?
I'm doing fine, bud. And here's two things I want to start off with. I'm going to sue you for copyright because I always called you the Real Deal ever since we became buddies. So you used the nickname I gave you for your podcast name, and I didn't get any credit, any royalties or anything for that. And second of all, I may not be that recognizable from Last Chance U because people know when I tell them, they'll say something or whatever. I was like, I was on that, right? It's a radio. Oh, that is you. I recognize the voice. I made some cameo appearances in the second season, voice only first season. And the only time I remember specifically getting noticed was walking through a subway line here in Mississippi. And I was telling what I wanted on my sandwich. And the lady's like, wait a minute. You're on that TV show on Netflix. It just came out, right? So
yeah, she said,
anyway.
I recognize that voice. Hey, that was, I think you were one of the main voices on that show. As far as whenever I watched it, I remember you for all the games. Whenever you're going through the plays and stuff like that, they're using your play-by-play. It was really neat. I enjoyed watching that, especially whenever it's somebody you know.
Yeah, well, I didn't just do play-by-play for the actual games. I did play-by-play for the big brawl. The big fight in 2015. That was the cliffhanger for number 2. I was talking about that today with someone at lunch that watched the show, and they were like, wait a minute, you also had some phone conversations with Buddy Stevens, who's the head football coach at EMCC and was definitely the main character. And they said they aired some of this. I said, absolutely. They aired one conversation that I didn't even know was being recorded. So I'm glad I minded my P's and Q's and said the right thing.
Well, I know we're talking about, that, but I know you wear a lot of hats. And for people that don't know and haven't been around radio and stuff like that, this is one of the hardest working dudes I've ever seen. Like, he wears me out just when I look at what he's going to be doing. I mean, and it's like the hours are crazy sometimes. And you just never know where he's going to be and all the stuff that goes into what he does. So I think it'd be neat to get some insight on that. So as far as, at WFCA, what is your role and what goes into what you do there?
Okay, here at WFCA, I do the weekday evening weathers. I also have a show from 4 to 6 that I record. We call it Voice Track. I could work it live if I wanted to, but with all the other things going on during the day, I come in a little earlier in the mornings than if I was to stay till 6, because I'm technically supposed to put in an 8-hour day. Sometimes you do a whole lot more than that in radio. Sometimes you do less during some of the slow months. You have to kind of pace yourself a little bit. I do commercials. I'll write ads. I'll cut ads, which means I'll voice them. Also, we'll put music behind them, maybe the full effects. Sometimes there's sound effects or something that have to go behind them. So I'll do all those things. I'll even voice commercials throughout the country, sometimes for friends or people that the other stations that don't have a bunch of voices will need. So I do that. I produce a lot of sports programs. One is SEC SEC Update. Had to think about the name of it because we're about to start it back up again for football. So it's heard on several stations in Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. And really, I do that program for halftime for EMCC and high school football when I'm doing those, because it gives me a break. And that way we don't have to have a studio host where somebody's in here not only playing commercials and stuff, but they would have to go on and fill airtime. So, because that could be tedious, because I'm ticky and I'd want someone in here that sounded very network quality. And we have some folks that are like, that's not me. I don't want to do that. So, so I do that program. Also, I do an MSU game day program that's local right here on WFCA. We're a 100,000 watt station. We reach 42 counties of Mississippi's 82. And so I'll do that about 3.5 hours prior to kick for an hour and a half. And the PA voice for Mississippi State football and men's and women's basketball joins me for that program. And I'll also do some selected, very few high school football games just because I don't want to get worn out. And I do a high school football scoreboard show on Friday nights from 10 to 11:30. Also preview SEC football on that program. And sometimes I have a student from French Camp Academy, which WFCA is a part of. It's called a work-based learning class. And so that student will come in and I'll teach them the ins and outs of radio. Got a kid from New Orleans who's a boarding student here, and he's interested in sportscasting. So we brought him in this year, and bless his soul, sometimes he sees me, sometimes he doesn't, because I have press conferences, other interviews I've got to go out for and things like that. So I cut interviews, like I'll go either do them over the phone, over Zoom, or in person for the shows. We do a Fellowship of Christian Athletes show where I interview coaches and players of faith from Mississippi State or Ole Miss or anywhere else. I've had Bobby Bowden on that program. I've had Scott Hamilton, the famous skater. He's actually going to be on that program, but I've interviewed him before. I've interviewed folks like Jerry Rice and been around so many famous people that as a kid never dreamed would be possible. So I do a lot of things. That's just WFCA. and I didn't get to everything. So, but I'm production manager, also on-air voice, and sports director. And sports director is one of the main things.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about right there. See, I'm breathing heavy right now just from listening.
How do you want me to want to do at Mississippi State?
yeah, that we can go right into that. So what all do you do for Mississippi State?
So a lot of times my jobs with WFCA will kind of marry kind of what I do at Mississippi State. So I'm part of the MSU broadcast team. I've done things in the past like post-game interviews for what we call the fifth quarter show. I've filled in hosting that. I've filled in being sort of the analyst on that radio program. I've filled in on the pregame show. So when that happens, I either have to tape the local pregame show or have somebody fill in for me so I could be prepared to do the network pregame show. But I'm just a backup with all that. I've produced that show before. I've been the backup play-by-play announcer for baseball. So I've done a numerous amount of baseball games in my career for Mississippi State, which is an honor. I've done softball color on TV. I've done softball play-by-play on TV. I've also done softball play-by-play and color on radio for Mississippi State. And my main job, I've done basketball games as a fill-in play-by-play, and my main job is play-by-play for Mississippi State women's basketball. So that's what I signed in the contract. There's a couple of other things in that says, hey, you'll do this or X number of that. So just anything and everything that they need me to do. And so that keeps me pretty busy throughout the year. I travel, so I get to see you a little more often than I normally would, because a lot of times I'm in Nashville or Knoxville or anywhere in between. So I'll be doing lots of travels to Tennessee again this year. And so hopefully I'll get in. So that's a lot of what I do. But I've also done PA for track and field at MSU. I've done the crowd PA, where you walk around and say, okay, here's a trivia question. You ask somebody from the stands. I've even voiced their award ceremony for athletics. So where I go in, kind of like if somebody was, if you've ever watched the Grammys, they're like, now entering the stage or coming on stage is Todd Hearn, a Grammy award winner in the past, something like that. And so I would do that. I'm not seen. I didn't host it, MC it or anything, but I've been in the I've been in the background, and they've used my voice for that. I've also hosted luncheons with women's basketball with the boosters, welcome back dinners, all sorts of things. So I'm used to being in front of people and also behind the microphone. So that's just a little bit of what I've done in the past and still do.
And Jason, we've got a long history, because whenever I first met Jason was in Mississippi when I was down there from '99 to around 2004, 2005 ish, and that's where me and Jason developed a relationship, and both our loves of sports, and he did have me on his Friday night scoreboard show one time, and then he never allowed me on there again. So
no. There's a time when you just don't say certain things, and Todd calls controversy. But here's the thing about that: if there wasn't controversy, that means nobody's listening, and so that's always a good thing.
Yeah. I got you. I got you clicks. I got you more clicks than you would have got if I wouldn't have said that. So
I got the show canceled.
That'll be all right. But anyway,
yeah.
So we go back a long ways, and he was, like he said, he was the voice of women's basketball, and that went very well. I have 2 daughters, so he was kind of an in for us, for the girls to get to go to some games and stuff like that. And they had a really good time. And I don't know if I've ever told you, but I really appreciate that. And I know they did. They had a ball. And so, what's that?
I said I enjoyed it too. An opportunity to be around you and your daughters, and of course Jennifer, your wife, and it was always good to have those times hanging out. And when I've had lunches with you guys when I've been in Nashville, and that's the other good thing about traveling, is you get to see friends that you don't see on a normal basis or everyday basis. But I guess in my case, it's normal, because there's a couple of times a year where I'm in certain towns or cities where I get to get with someone I graduated high school with, or somebody that's a friend that moved to a certain place and has been distant for a while. So a broadcaster once told me one of the most rewarding things about being in the position they're in. It was a former sportscaster at Mississippi State. Well, he's still there doing a couple of sports or one sport. I'll say it is Jim Ellis. He's the legendary baseball announcer at MSU. He's been there for 44 years, ever since I've been born. And once he was the voice of the Bulldogs, so he traveled all the time. But he said the most rewarding thing about the job is the people and the relationships that you make over the years. And he's 100% correct. I love putting the headset on. I love sports, and I couldn't imagine myself doing anything else. But part of that is being around people and building those relationships, because what the podcast, normally talks about, whether you're talking about real estate or you're talking about investments or anything like that, it all revolves a lot of times around people. And so that's probably true in my sense. The most rewarding thing is not, oh, I got to be on TV or I got to meet this celebrity superstar. It's the people you're with and make lifetime friendships with on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. From doing the podcast, just everyone I've had on, I think 90% of the time, it comes back to that. It comes back to relationships. And no matter what the field, whether it's business, whether it's service industry, whether it's real estate or whatever, it doesn't matter. It all comes back to relationships and how you manage those relationships or cultivate them.
Yep.
I'm not always the greatest at that. I try. I know you can attest to that, because I don't always text you back whenever I should, or different things like that. And if I do that, I'm sorry to anybody that's listening. I try my best though to get back with you. But yeah, it's all about relationships and everything. No matter what you're doing, you're exactly right. And I felt like I developed a lot of relationships when I was in Mississippi. And I still have a lot of those to this day. I just talked to Paul Courtney the other day, see how they were doing, getting ready for football season. I just happened to catch him on a good day because practice got rained out. So,
speaking of, coaches are busy.
What's that?
I said, speaking of busy, coaches are busy.
Oh,
and so about texted with a coach friend of mine not too long ago about kind of getting together and this, that, and the other. And all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, it's getting about time where in August from basically they don't have any time, unless you see them maybe around 8 or 9 o'clock at night, but they have families too that they're going home to and wanting to visit. So it's kind of hard to have some of that personal time. But yeah, it seems like too, the older we get, the more hectic life gets.
Oh, absolutely. You run short on time, no matter what it is that you're doing. But yeah, with Paul and James and Chris, and they're all coaches, and so they all their time they probably won't listen to this for 6 months, about December, whenever they get done coaching right now after they win the state title somewhere. So, or
if they
do what?
That even if they listen to us at all, they're probably like, yeah, we don't want to listen to Todd, Jason converse. We can do that in person.
That's probably true. That's probably true. But so let's get back to so we that's where we cultivated our relationship back years ago, but we've been able to maintain that. We still Jason's learned that if he wants to get me to do something, he just texts my wife and gets her in on the deal. That works a little better. But so we've been able to see each other off and on different times throughout the years and maintain that relationship. And so let's get back to football though, because I know that's what I want. I'm so excited about today because I'm like, man, it's almost football. It's like what 16 days or something like that. I don't know. It's getting really close. I'm ready to roll. But for sportscasters, it's here. Okay, and this is it was here a month ago for y'all. So
yeah, you're and I'm going to be honest. I'm a little bit behind on my prep, and people ask me all the time, "You ready for football? You ready for football?" And I know they mean like excitement level for football, but I always say this: I'm ready, but not really ready, not prepared. I don't want to say I'm not prepared, but I'm fully prepared. So I'm always kind of like ready, but not fully prepared. Because when it gets here, it gets here. I mean, you're worried about dotting all your I's, crossing all your T's. I remember Dan Mullen, when he was the football coach at Mississippi State, he said, week one's always, you're trying to get your routine. You're trying to remember, did I bring the right amount of highlighters, the green ones, yellow ones that we use for different things when we're filling out notes for kids or this, that, and the other. Like, have we got all our ducks in a row? And you always worry about that until you get after the first week and you start getting back in your routine, because most fans aren't going to know. Well, I guess in football, if you're not prepared, they'll know. But like as far as us sportscasters, a lot of times we can wing it. We may not feel prepared in our head, but then once we get in that routine, then we feel comfortable. And so it's always tough when you hear that countdown and you hear the music, or, you go live and this, that, and the other. The first time you speak in a couple of months, then all of a sudden you start getting to rolling. And then I remember my last broadcast for the network was softball. Mississippi State was in the super regionals with Arizona in Starkville. And I was rolling, my prep. I knew how to get this done and be ready for a broadcast. I felt comfortable in the air. And luckily 12 months out of the year, I am radio, but I'm not always sportscasting. So you knock off some rust first couple of games, whether it be football, basketball, or baseball. And so, but then you get rolling, you get in routine, it's okay. But I'm ready for it. I think we're going to have a couple of good teams that you and I root for. I know you're a Vol fan. I'm a Mississippi State fan and cover the Bulldogs. And I think both are going to be pretty good. I question Tennessee's defense a little bit, but that's not what's exciting, right? It's offense. And I think with Josh Heupel there, that offense looks really good. I think it's going to be better this year. I think they'll win games by scoring points. But, defenses need to be existent. And so even though offense sells tickets, defense wins championships. So we'll see what Tennessee's going to have. I think they're going to be better. I think Mississippi State's going to be better. The problem with the MSU schedule, or the problem with the MSU rather, is the schedule. I think because it's the toughest, the second toughest strength of schedule in the country. When you're having to play your Georgias and your Alabamas, your LSUs, and even Ole Miss. Ole Miss was the better team last year. And I think State had a really good team, but Ole Miss ultimately had the better team because they had better quarterback play for what their team needed. But Will Rogers, I think, is going to be maybe this year's Matt Corral, because I think he's going to put up even better numbers. Is more comfortable in the system, and it is year 3 under Mike Leach. And we all know that Mike Leach, year number 3 is the year. And even Dan Mullen didn't have a year 3 like I think that Mike Leach could have, because Mullen had a decent year number one, great year number two, and regressed a little bit year three. Not criticizing Dan Mullen. I think he was a very successful football coach at Mississippi State. But I think Mike Leach has a chance to do something that a lot of coaches haven't done in Mississippi State football history, and that's have a better progression from year 1, 2, and 3. Even though the strength of the schedule is going to be tough. Hey, State can win 8 games and still be an excellent football team, but they're going to be judged because they're MSU and they're 8-4. Well, they're playing juggernaut.
In the SEC, if you win 8 football games, you're pretty good. You know,
right. But,
that's
and some people expect sometimes 10 wins every year from a Mississippi State. That's not going to happen. I think you set yourself up for that, and I think it was with today's changing landscape of college football. One might argue it was easier to build up to have that, and I guess I agree with that because. Like, let's say every couple of years, your team's going to be 10 wins. And I think that's what State can root for because they had that under Dan Mullen. He might regress a little bit, but then he would have a couple of guys in his system and you'd have them there for a while. And then they're like seniors and experience. That's what Mike Leach has this year. There's a couple of transfers. Malik Heath, who went to Ole Miss, but let's be honest, Malik Heath, he's very good talent, but he wasn't starting. I mean, he had some young people that took his job from a year ago. So, and then he goes to Ole Miss, kind of talks a little trash saying the coaches didn't develop him in Starkville like they're doing in Oxford. I mean, that's just typical rivalry stuff. That's going to happen. But I think State's got some depth. They have 16 returning starters, offense, defense. Obviously, if you have 16 returning starters, you can't have all 16 on one side of the ball. So that's really good. And they've got some elder statesmen. And even though he's a sophomore on the field, he's a junior in the classroom, Will Rogers, and he still has 3 more years of eligibility. Should he use them all, that could be very dangerous for opposing defenses in the SEC. So I think State is built to have a very good season. I just worry about, I mean, they're projected, 7-5, 3-5 in the SEC. Finally, they're not projected to be the bottom team of the SEC West. But I kind of understand it is what it is. I mean, you're battling LSU's, Arkansas's, Alabama, Auburn's, Ole Miss's, year in and year out. So I think that this could be the best team Mississippi State has had, obviously since 2014, but I liken this team back to that 2010 team that won 9 games under Dan Mullen and so easily could have won 10 or 11. And that's the year they went to the Gator Bowl. That was 2010, Dan Mullen's second year, and they just beat the socks off of the Michigan Wolverines. And so I think this is that type team. But you compare the schedules and who's better that wasn't as good in 2010 on State schedule. One of those is Georgia. State beat Georgia that year. They weren't the Georgia they are now under Kirby Smart. So they had a Mark Richt coach team, which Mark Richt was a really good coach, but Georgia was kind of in a little bit of a down year by their standards.
Yeah, y'all really have. I mean, that's where Tennessee and Mississippi State are very similar this year in the fact that they both bring back very good experienced quarterbacks. Not everybody can say that, and that's a luxury for coaches to have that experienced quarterback coming back. That's a big deal. And, I mean, Rodgers I was just looking through his stats, 4,700 yards last year. And, I mean, if he stays through his eligibility, I mean, heck, he's already got most of the records at Mississippi State. I mean, he's going to be setting the bar where nobody's going to be able to reach.
Yeah. The only way that Will Rogers could even come close to Joe Burrow's record is if State plays 13 games. That's not going to happen. I mean, State's got to go to like the SEC title game or go to the playoffs, which would put them in the title game or something like that, like Joe Burrow did and went to the championship game. So, yeah, they would have to make the playoffs for that. So I don't think he will beat Joe, but he could come close. I think he's throwing for over 5,000 yards this year. Because I just think this offense is going to be a lot better. Now, I was at practice or the first scrimmage the other day at Davis Wade Stadium, and a couple of things concerned me. Passes that were right in the hands of a receiver went up in the air, to the side, helicoptering, because they didn't reel it in. And that was a problem in the Egg Bowl. It was a problem in the Liberty Bowl because State offensively just kind of regressed. And then the defense in the Liberty Bowl regressed because they had some sickness issues. They had some opt-outs. Charles Cross on offense didn't play. He's going to be a big loss at left tackle for State this year. We all know games are won and lost in the trenches. The offensive line still is a little bit of a concern. just because we don't know much yet. They've got to go out and prove themselves, and that could disrupt the offense a little bit. The problem with State last year is they were just inconsistent. They'd win some games that you kind of scratch your head thinking, are they ready to win those type of games, like going on the road, beating A&M, maybe beating Auburn the way they did in the second half, even though we know the Tigers after that never recovered. Then they go up and they lose games they shouldn't. Like they go to Memphis and they lose that game they shouldn't. People can bring up referees all they want.
Hand the ball to the official.
I get it. To me, it's more of Mississippi State's fault. I think it's the return man's fault. I agree with you. Hand the ball to the official. You can't just go on one knee and kind of touch it and then get up. Maybe the officials didn't handle things right, but I don't think that's what cost State the game. State didn't have a field goal kicking team last year. I mean, they didn't have field goal kicker, period. They kept rotating guys in and out, trying to find consistency. They didn't have that. So that lost games like putting the ball on the ground against LSU. The first two offensive possessions, State threw an interception and then fumbled the ball. And those led to Tiger touchdowns. And then State at the end, because State was always a strong fourth quarter offensive team in the regular season, they'd make comebacks like Louisiana Tech. That's a game State easily could have lost. So if you look at it through the maroon color glasses, you're like, oh, State should have won 10 games because they lost to Memphis, LSU when they shouldn't have, Arkansas when they really probably should have won that game. But then again, if you take the maroon colored glasses off, maybe they should have beaten Louisiana Tech to open the season. But they made a furious fourth quarter comeback. They showed signs of brightness a season ago, and then they showed signs of, man, they got a lot to work on. You just shake your head. So still, winning 7 games had a lot of momentum, but they lost their last 2. So there's not a lot of hype going into the season. Had they won those games and State won 9 games, then you've got a lot of hype going into this year. I think there's still excitement, but cautioned excitement going into this season. But what I saw in that scrimmage was not only some drop passes, like I kept looking over at somebody else like Egg Bowl. I looked to equipment managers at Egg Bowl, and they'd be like, shh, I'll say, which remind me, I wasn't being rude. I'm just like, it's frustrating as an alumnus and a fan supporter of Mississippi State. It wasn't the broadcaster coming out. It was the fan like, come on, we got to do better than that. And they were 5 of 9 from field goal range. Missed a chip shot 1, and they missed a long range when I was kind of paying attention. Sometimes I was on my phone texting or dealing with things. So that was a little bit of a concern. I think just inconsistency in the receiver. Now, defense always going to be ahead of offense. The defense was really good in that scrimmage. And this time of year, that's the way it's going to be. Defense ahead of offense. So I think State will be okay. It's just those 2 things that were a concern last year. Receivers dropping passes in key moments, turnovers, and they had some of those in that game, but you don't take too much of it. It's a scrimmage. A defensive unit that they've really gone out and plugged some holes, especially in the secondary at the transfer portal. And so I think that's where that's been an advantage for Mike Leach. And then the field goals, the kicking game. Those are the things that are a little bit concerning me in the scrimmage, but it is scrimmage number 1. You never leave scrimmage number 1 going, okay, that's it. That's telltale of how the season's going to go. Because that's idiotic to do that.
Oh, absolutely. And in the preseason, I mean, the biggest thing coaches are looking for in scrimmages is just who's going to make plays, who's learning, who's not making the same mistake over and over again and getting better, and who's going to be. I mean, because let's face it, every team last year had guys that were keys to that team that are not there anymore. So
right.
they've got to find out who that next guy is, who's going to be the guy that step up and take that place. And I know, with Rogers, who are the receivers? Or he lost quite a bit of his receiving production last year, so he's got to have some guys step up and go catch those balls and make some plays for him. Well,
he lost Mekhi Polk, and that was the leading receiver who entered the NFL draft, probably should have come back for a senior year. But I think he felt like he had done all he could do to kind of impress the scouts a little bit. Look at receivers this year. I think Justin Robinson, that transfer from Georgia, national champion Georgia, he's making some strides.
Yeah, he was the leading receiver in that scrimmage you were talking about.
Right. And you got Ra Thomas, who was a playmaker a season ago, especially on the back end of the season. Jaden Wally, who is a tremendous talent, and Austin Williams, who's the seasoned veteran. And it seems like Austin Williams has been at Mississippi State for 6 years. You get some of those players for certain teams that you're going, how long have they been there? It's been like that women's basketball. I'm like, how long has she been here? It's like, seems like I've been, especially with COVID, because now players can play for 6 years. And Austin Williams was part of that COVID team. So obviously he's going into his final year of eligibility, but he is that possession receiver. He's not the guy that's going to juke you to death. He's not going to make the athletic play like Jaden Wally or Ra Thomas, but Austin Williams is going to be a leader on the field. He's going to be the possession receiver. Just get right behind the sticks. He's going to be in the right spot. He's an excellent route runner. He got some athleticism, don't get me wrong, but he's not just going to wow you with his speed and athleticism. He will surprise you. He can you can misjudge him a little bit in the way he looks. I mean, he looks like he's going to get hit by a linebacker and break in half. So I worry about that sometimes when they throw, drag routes and stuff like that with him and throw it over the middle. But I think he could be very, very key in certain areas for Mike Leach in this offense. So those are the receivers to watch out for this year. And then you're always going to have somebody that's going to step up and surprise you. And they've got a lot of depth at receiver, which is a good thing because they're always wanting to put fresh legs out there to put pressure on teams defensively, because they'll run you to death with just routes and throwing the ball left and right. They'll run the ball some more this year. I'm hearing that coming out of camp, that you're going to see a lot more run plays by Mississippi State this year, and that obviously keeps defenses honest. And they've got a couple of really good running backs that I saw one of them on the sidelines the other day, and I'm sitting here going, my goodness. I mean, that looks like an absolute linebacker. And that was Jaquavius Marks. And they also have Dylan Johnson, two guys. They're going to rotate in and out. And but Marks, they call him Woody. My goodness, he is a specimen. I wouldn't want to have to hit him if I was an opposing linebacker or defensive lineman, especially a safety. If he gets out 1-on-1 and gets in open space.
Better go for those legs is all I can say. Whenever you got somebody big like that,
right.
and then hope you don't get knocked out.
Yeah, it all goes back to the offensive. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you were the guy that knocked running backs out, even though you were a running back when you were on defense, right? You weren't the guy that took those type licks on defense. When you were on defense.
Yeah, my philosophy was it didn't hurt as bad if I hit them before they hit me. So.
But it all goes back to the offensive line. I think that's going to be the big key for Mississippi State, and how good they can be on that side of the ball is how well this unit. Charles Cross, in a lot of ways underrated, but yet obviously we see the NFL scouts didn't underrate him. But I think he kind of went under the radar amongst accolades in the SEC. But it is the SEC. And I think sometimes you favor teams like Alabama, Georgia, big name schools, maybe Tennessee. LSU, when you're looking at some of these top athletes, but there are guys that play for Mississippi State that could be playing for all of those schools I mentioned for sure, and even starting. So it's a good thing.
Speaking of all those other schools, who's going to be your outside of Mississippi State and Tennessee? Who's going to be a sleeper team in the SEC this year? Somebody that that jumps up and surprises everybody, like Arkansas has for a couple of years, and Ole Miss did a little bit last year. And who's going to be that team this year, in your opinion?
The first name that comes to mind is Arkansas, because we've just seen them just continually improve over the last couple of seasons, but I still think people are sleeping on them a little bit. Kentucky, we know they're good. It's going to be hard to say a sleeper team. Maybe even a Texas A&M, if they can get to the win total that everybody expects them, everybody in Aggie land and with their recruiting and stuff expects them. And 8 wins is not good enough in Aggie land. Under Jimbo Fisher, that's not what they hired him for. And what is this going to be, the first year into that number 1 recruiting class? Okay, who's going to step up from that recruiting class and be impactful? Like I said, we know what Kentucky is. They're going to be good. I don't think Auburn is going to improve drastically enough to be a sleeper team. Ole Miss, I think they're going to continue steady. I don't think that they're going to be the Sugar Bowl team they were a year ago, but with their schedule and they plugged in some transfer talent, I think they'll be good again. They'll be a bowl team, and they'll be a threat to win the Egg Bowl, of course. LSU, I think a lot of question marks in some ways, aspects, but they certainly always have talent. And they've got the transfer from Arizona State. I'm going to flip through my notes here because his name escapes me at the moment. But anyhow, they're going to be pretty good. And, we saw Miles Brennan, who walked away from football. He's been told he's not going to be the starter down there because of the kid that transferred. And I knew his name was going to slip my mind as soon as we got live on this thing. But, man, I don't know. That's a really good question. South Carolina, I think South Carolina is the team that maybe could be the sleeper team. They have a ceiling. I don't think we're going to see South Carolina. They might just kind of repeat what they did a season ago as far as win totals. They might be a little bit better at it. I don't think Spencer Rattler's the big savior right now for Shane Beamer and this team, but it's hard not to love Shane Beamer, his energy. I think they're building. It's just really hard to say. Florida, with Billy Napier, Florida was a mess. The middle of last season and the end of the season. I don't think they're going to have enough to flip it around year one. It's also hard to keep up with all these transfers too. Who's here and there and this, that, and the other. So that certainly can help teams with the new transfer rules and how that's going and stuff right now. So that's a good question. The first team I thought of was Arkansas, then South Carolina. But then again, I don't know how good South Carolina's going to be. I will say it's probably Arkansas because I still think people are expecting Arkansas to be competitive, but not very good. And we'll see. They've got good quarterback play, fair quarterback play. I think they can get better quarterback play. And KJ Jefferson, and I think he will end up being a pretty good quarterback by the end of his career for sure.
Yep, you had one of the picks I had. Mine was going to be South Carolina in the East and LSU in the West. I'm hoping. Yeah. I think LSU is going. It may take a little bit of time before them to get and I'm hoping it's going to be maybe the second half of the season after we play them. So before they kind of it's year one, and it don't matter how good a coach you are. Year one is a little tough, especially at the beginning of the season to figure out what everybody's doing and what everybody can do, what people are good at, and different things like that. And with South Carolina, I just thought last year they continually got better and better and better as the season went along, and that's kind of what I've always looked for teams is somebody that that they just continually get. No, they're not. I didn't say they were great, and they're not going to be great even this year. I know you got Spencer Rattler in, but I think that's I don't know that's going to be that big of a deal, because yes. Could he be a great quarterback? Absolutely. But my concern for South Carolina on that side is, he came from a pretty good offensive head coach from a program that had really good receivers, a really good offensive line, a really good players around him, and he had trouble in that system. So I just don't know how that's going to translate into South Carolina that doesn't have any of those factors.
Right.
And you're playing in the SEC against SEC defenses and not Big 12 defenses.
Agreed.
It's a whole different animal. So that would
most definitely. I was just going to say, I agree, most definitely, because the thing about South Carolina last year is they exceeded expectations, which can be a problem for year number two if you get a little ahead of yourself. But one reason why South Carolina was successful is a couple of things. Ball bounced their way, but they played hard. They listened to Shane Beamer and their staff. They put them in position to be successful, but they also went out and just fought every single game. They were a tough out. So they played with all their mind. They didn't give up. And that's one reason why you saw them be 7-6 and beat a really good North Carolina team there in that Belk Bowl. But North Carolina may not have wanted to be there, where South Carolina was like, hey, this is fantastic. We didn't expect to be bowling. This is basically a playoff for us. So I agree with you there. I think South Carolina would probably be the main one to say could be a sleeper, possibly.
And it goes along with what you were saying about Mississippi State a while ago, too. I mean, South Carolina could possibly win 7 games, and it would look the same as last year, but they could be 10 times better
absolutely
team than they were last year and still only win 7 games because of just the way the schedule falls.
Yeah, and I don't have their schedule in front of me. I'm trying to look at it. But obviously, when you end the year with a rival in Clemson, that's all automatically going to make your schedule tough because that's a non-conference game where your conference opponents. Now, the East is not as strong as the West. That's got to get better at some point in the future. And sometimes you keep waiting for it. You're waiting for Florida, and you've been waiting for Tennessee a little bit. I think Tennessee's more on the edge of being back to what they were than Florida. I think they're a whole lot closer to that. I think they've got the right coach. Not saying that Billy Napier's not the right coach, but Tennessee's out in the forefront. I think Florida thought they had things with Dan Mullen, and I just do not know why things did not work out. I don't know. I guess if Dan just wasn't the right fit for Florida, he was a perfect fit for Mississippi State. I don't blame him for going ahead. That's where he has no loyalty to Mississippi State. I think he's looking back now and has a little bit more appreciation for Starkville, Mississippi State, Mississippi State people. He was in Starkville recently and tweeting out some really positive things, this, that, and the other. But I don't know that he has a regret for leaving, because how do you say no to Florida when you've been there before, you helped win a national championship there, and you're not from Mississippi? And I mean, it's here's the thing. A lot of people dog Starkville, but Starkville's not a bad place. But I think for the most part, I love it. I think it's a very underrated place. I think it's made fun of too much. And some of that making fun has gone down than it used to be over the years. It's become more of a fun town, a lot cleaner town, nicer town, a lot more condos, and the food atmosphere is great. A lot of things have changed in the last 15 years in Starkville, Mississippi State. But sometimes you want a little bit bigger, right? Gainesville's bigger, maybe bigger stadium, or, Florida's football brand is a bigger name than Mississippi State's football brand. So I get those things. But there's also coaches that have come into Mississippi State and they're like, hey, this is where I want to end my career, because it's a perfect fit for them. I still think it was a good fit for Dan Mullen, but I've gone off on a rabbit trail. I still think Florida, you scratch your head. You can't pinpoint. And I kind of scratched my head about Tennessee there for a while. And I realized this is where it's harder at Tennessee because of your in-state talent. You have it, but it's not like Florida. It's not like per capita Mississippi, even though Tennessee has more people, a bigger state. It's not like Alabama and Georgia. And Philip Fulmer did such a great job of recruiting outside of Tennessee. And I think that's where Josh Heupel's going to start going back and getting some of those players out of Texas. I know California was a big state that Philip Fulmer recruited. I don't know that I'd recruit California now more than Texas. Places like that. But Tennessee also is going to have to come down south to get some more players. Tennessee's almost there. They're going to be good. There's too much money and support in that program. You go to Neyland Stadium, you look around, and my first game at Neyland Stadium was with you. And I remember you and I standing on the football field looking around, and the tee broke open, and I just didn't understand the tradition until I saw it. I mean, I knew about it, but and I didn't dog it. But then all of a sudden you hear the roar of the crowd, and State wasn't very good. And it was an 11:30 a.m. kickoff, but there was still about 70% capacity. And I'm thinking, I can't imagine these games where Neyland is 107 strong. And it goes back to those days when Florida and Tennessee were whoever won that game in September was going to play in Atlanta for the SEC championship. I'm thinking, I can't imagine how loud it was for those moments, and how much you guys despised Florida. I can only imagine.
Yeah, that still continues to this day. But it gets so loud in there whenever it's. Even the Ole Miss game last year. Everybody wants to talk about it, but the atmosphere outside of all the other stuff that happened was amazing. Yeah. I mean, it was, and that's what I feel like. I'm not saying Heupel wasn't bought in before that, but after that, that's when I think it that turned his blood orange.
Absolutely, and you have to have those moments where you realize, oh my goodness, these fans are passionate. You could say, oh, they're passionate. I know they're passionate, but sometimes you have to feel it. And like you said, it turned his blood orange, and that's happened at every school. And I want to go back to the incident. I'm going to defend Tennessee. First of all, number one, should never have happened. But we understand that passion runs deep in SEC sports, in particular football. And let's not act like Ole Miss has never had incidences in basketball and in football where their fans did something stupid. Mississippi State. I remember Kentucky, I think it was 2009 or 10, packed house, passionate. Bulldogs would always play Kentucky really, really tough. And Kentucky would find a way to win, at home at the last minute. I know of so many incidences there. And officials made some bad calls. Calipari's not well liked by anybody in the SEC. And so passions run deep. All of a sudden I saw some water bottles flying from the top and landed. And I was like, oh, this is a bad look. And I remember the AD at the time, Greg Byrne, was not a happy camper at all. And of course, they got on the mic, addressed it and stuff. So it's happened at Mississippi State. It's happened at LSU. So let's not beat Tennessee up because of a couple of incidences in 2 different sports last year, because that's happened everywhere in the league. A lot of times in the SEC will point fingers. Well, that fan base is redneck, or that fan base is mean. Right? You could say that fan base has its fair share of rednecks, mean people, nice people, good fans, bad fans, whatever. It's every SEC school. But ultimately, man, I could not imagine covering another conference and the passion that is SEC football and all sports, man. And baseball is getting there. You look at Tennessee and a lot of their atmospheres this year. Arkansas, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, and of course LSU hasn't gotten back to what they were. I think they're on the cusp of having that down at Alex Box, but the SEC is the best. And anyway, a lot of folks don't like to hear that, and I think the SEC is just going to continue to get stronger in all sports.
Oh yeah, especially in adding Texas and Oklahoma here coming up in a couple of years.
Bingo. I
mean, you're starting to take some of the best teams out of other conferences, and I'm not sure I'm not sure how I feel about that's going to put us at 16. It's getting really big.
No more than 6. Matter of fact, we said no more than 14, and then they add those 2, and now I'm like, okay, let's pump the brakes, because it's getting to where your conference champion might as well be crowned national champion, because it's going to be harder in a way to win the S. I'll be honest, in a lot of cases, sometimes it's harder to go win in Hoover than sometimes Omaha. And I know that makes 0 sense. But it's harder maybe to win the SEC regular season in baseball or even in football than it is to win the national championship. So that's why these SEC teams are so battle tested. Now, some will go back. Okay, this is what bothers me. Every single bowl year, people start watching the SEC versus other conferences. And the SEC used to kind of dominate, but it's also getting to the point where teams now there's a bullseye on an SEC team's face. If you got the SEC patch, they're going to give their all. And sometimes it's hard for maybe other teams to match that intensity. Like, for example, Texas Tech wanted to beat Mississippi State because Mike Leach just kept saying, well, they owe me $2 million, and then they're like, it's the SEC. It's our former coach. And a lot of people still love him. Don't get me wrong. As a matter of fact, the interim coach at the time was a former quarterback under Mike Leach. But there was more motivation because of the Leach connection, because everybody talks about how great the SEC is and blah, blah, blah. And now Mike's talking about how great Starkville, Mississippi State is. So there's that motivation to beat MSU. And the Bulldogs were a little bit depleted and this, that, and the other. But Texas Tech was a lot better than people gave them credit for, too. So people are looking, Texas Tech's not that good. They're in the Big 12. They kind of stumble a little bit some during the season. This is a team that beat Houston earlier in the season. And we know how good Houston is. And Houston's going to be good again this year. And so anyway, I think that's kind of these outlying bowls where teams don't want to be there, quote unquote. Look, I love the Liberty Bowl. I love every bowl. And I want this because I'm a Mississippi State fan, and I realize that State's not going to be year in and year out Outback or year in and year out Sugar or Orange or this, that, and the other. So I'm happy about bowls. I'm excited. I want to win them because I want State to do well, and I want the SEC. I kind of keep score too, and it gets frustrating, but I think it's a little bit different now comparing some of those. But when you get the best on the best, that's where the SEC excels, and you'll start seeing that when you get to the college football playoffs. Then you're battling the best of the best for sure. And that makes it a little bit harder for some of these other conferences to win. And they stomp and kick and point to all those other bowls where, quote unquote, it doesn't matter. Oh, we won that. The ACC, they were, no, you're not.
Yeah, but when you look at it a lot of times too, and the bowls where the somebody else is winning, you've got a team that finished second in their conference playing a team that finished 8th or 9th in our conference. So I mean
bingo.
That's like comparing apples and oranges, and it was still a good game, and they really still should have beat you, but and you were number 2 in your conference.
Well, that's their. You look back at State in 2010. I talked about on New Year's Day, January 1st, 2011. State absolutely demolished Michigan. Well, it's because State was way better, but yet they were the lesser pick from the SEC. Where Michigan, let's say Michigan, it was the 5th pick in the SEC, and it's like 7th pick or 5th pick in the Big Ten, 7th pick. So Michigan supposedly is better because they finished higher in their conference. But then the Bulldogs just were so talent laden, and they were way, way better than Michigan. And I shouldn't say way, way better. They were much better than Michigan, but played like they were way, way better and smashed Michigan in the mouth. That's kind of changed now where I agree with what you're saying, but now these teams like Michigan will, even though they're a bigger program, they want to be somewhere else other than the Gator Bowl. Well, let's say they play an SEC team, it's going to be a little bit more important to them. You see what I'm saying? Like when the SEC started flexing its muscles and beating all these teams, and then they started getting mad and huffy about it because they keep hearing all the SEC chants, and then ESPN, CBS, everybody's always talking about the SEC. Now they're starting to take some of these bowl games a little more seriously against the SEC. So they're playing with more of a chip on their shoulder. But regular season, I mean, you look at Mississippi State last year, they beat a really good NC State team. NC State was a good football team, and the State beat them, 21-3 or something like that in Starkville, and beat them in every facet of the game. And that's what was so confusing about MSU a season ago. I go back to games that they won. They beat NC State, and you beat Texas A&M on the road, and then you lose to Memphis on the road, and almost lost to Louisiana Tech in the opener. So it can be kind of frustrating. Hopefully, State's more consistent.
But the fireworks are fun though, so it's kind of like with Tennessee. I mean, our offense is fun. Our defense, you never know what you're going to get. But the offense, they might go 3 and out a couple of times, and then boom, 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 all of a sudden they've scored 3 touchdowns in 30 seconds.
That's you always rely on your offense. Because they're going to make mistakes too. They're going to fumble sometimes. They're going to throw an interception. That was State's problem a year ago because they put the ball on the ground too much.
Yeah, and that turnovers are killers.
Yeah, absolutely. They weren't solid in the kicking game. So that's one reason. They lost several games that you think about the kicking game. Now, they won it making a game-winning field goal against Louisiana Tech. But then you look back where State against Memphis, this is where it's so frustrating. Not only did they give up that touchdown on a punt that should have been down, should have been taken care of better by Mississippi State, handled better by Mississippi State. Yeah, the officials are kind of weird, blah, blah, blah. But just because that official's running in and waving and then stops, it was like, oh, it should have been down. Well, really, it was live. That was a mistake on the official, and I get that. So, but Memphis takes it back for a touchdown. That changed things because what State had it 4th and goal from the 1, and they went for it instead of kicking the field goal. There was a couple other times where they go for it on 4th down in plus territory instead of kicking a field goal because they didn't trust field goal kicking. And I understand because they missed some earlier in the game. So you miss some, then you don't go for some. I'll take it back to that 4th down and goal from the 1 where they had it 1st and goal from inside the 5 and couldn't get the end zone. To me, that's where the game's lost because that's a possession you had to come out of there with points, and they didn't do it.
Yeah,
and when you gamble,
that's a killer.
Yeah, when you gamble on 4th down, you look at what Lane Kiffin did last year against Alabama. Lane Kiffin just threw all the analytics out. It's like, okay.
He was playing like I play EA Sports.
Right. Exactly. But to his point, you had to do that. Give yourself a chance. It either goes in your favor or it doesn't. And they look bad because of it. Ole Miss was a much better team than they looked against Alabama and Tuscaloosa. But he kept going for it on 4th down, all these things that everybody's like, yeah, look at the chart. Coach, look at the chart. Oh, he shouldn't do that. I mean, he threw caution to the wind so many times. It just didn't work out. But like he said, had I done those things, we still would have lost the game. I was just trying to give ourselves a chance, put points on the board, and I think he was just kind of tossing his, it's like playing Russian roulette, tossing his ball in there and seeing where it would land,
Yeah.
Not Russian roulette. I'm sorry, roulette.
That's one thing I like about Heupel too at Tennessee is he doesn't play it safe. Like whenever he's playing, he's playing in the big games. He's not one of those coaches that, oh yeah, I'm just going to punt it right here, and play it, so we can just keep it at, if we're playing Alabama, just so we can keep it at 21 points instead of them possibly. Right. He don't care. He's playing to win. If we got to go for it on 4th down in our own territory toward the end of the game, and it's a difference. What's the difference? You lost to 21 or 28. What, at least if you go for it and you get a touchdown, now you cut it to 14 and give yourself a chance, So I like that mentality of, I mean, you can't do it all the time, especially early in the game, but you've got to pick your spots and play to win, and don't. It just annoys the fire out of me for somebody that wants to play to keep it close. Well, I already know we're going to lose, but I'm just going to play to keep it close, to keep it respectable. Well, if you ain't playing to win, you don't need to be out there.
Right. Agreed.
There's a former coach at UT that was really, really bad about that, and I won't mention any names, but you know who I'm talking about. But so what's your feeling on Tennessee this year? I know we hadn't really we discussed Mississippi State and we discussed sleepers in the SEC. What's your feeling on? That's what a lot of people are going to want to hear on listening to my podcast. So what's your professional opinion on UT this year?
I don't know if I'd ask my professional opinion just yet, because I haven't really kind of studied what's been going on a little bit during their training camp, not fall camp, because there's nothing fall about the weather outside. I think it'd be great. You talked about Hendon Hooker, having an experienced quarterback coming back in an offense that he's really comfortable in. He's been under Josh Heupel. Heupel's offense is really good. And Heupel's a reason for that. I think he's kind of a creator of a lot of what they're doing. Defense is the question mark a little bit. Hopefully they're better than I think a lot of people are kind of predicting them to be. I think Tennessee's going to take a big step this year. You've got a lot of talent there. There's losses, and some of that's on defense, Ted Jackson, safety, and Matthew Butler, defensive tackle. So who's going to replace those guys? But you've got some keys back, obviously, with Cedric Tillman, with Hooker. But Banks comes back, too, at linebacker for Tennessee. And that's an area you want a key returner at that position defensively, because it's such an important position. I think some people underrate that position and how good your defense is. And a lot of times it depends on how good your linebackers are. In a lot of ways. So projected 8-4, I think that's doable. And looking at the schedule, I thought I had it right here in front of me. I do not have the schedule in front of me. Do you have the schedule in front of you, Todd?
I don't, but I can get it real quick.
It's Ball State. That's a win. I think you win against Pittsburgh. Akron, my buddy Joe Moorhead, coach in Akron, I don't think he's going to be able to beat Tennessee and Knoxville. Florida, I think you win that game, so you're going to go September undefeated, barring some big problem.
Don't forget Pittsburgh. Don't forget Pitt there.
Yeah, they lost a quarter.
Yeah, I agree, but I think that's a swing game for us.
It could be a swing game. They lost their best receiver and quarterback.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. That's fair, because Pittsburgh's not going to be a Ball State or an Akron or even a Florida. Pittsburgh better than Florida in a way. But it still is an SEC team with SEC talent in Florida. I still think that game at LSU could prove big. I think Tennessee could go win that one. Alabama, at this point, at this juncture, I would say Alabama at the edge, obviously, in that game. Then you got Tennessee Martin. Kentucky's very solid, but not
we're in their head.
And what right? You've won that. You shouldn't have. That game's in Knoxville. You go on the road to Georgia. That's going to be another tough task. I think Tennessee could win 9 games. I think better than 8-4. And looking at the schedule right now, I think they could do 9 games. I think you're going to beat Ball State, Pittsburgh, Akron, Florida. I think you go undefeated in September. If you don't, folks, don't blame me. Maybe I'm undervaluing Pittsburgh a little bit because they lost those two key offensive weapons. Georgia.
I'm a little concerned about Florida, not because of talent wise, but just the same exact thing that I said about us in Kentucky. The reverse of that. Until we beat them, it doesn't. We've lost several of those games where we had a much more talented team. So
should have been.
Yeah, we should have beat them, and we should have beat them several years where we had more talent than they did. But it's we got to get past that mental block. So
okay, so you're projected 8-4. I think that could be like a swing game for you in winning 9 games.
Yeah,
because that's going to be important, because you need to win that one before you even go to win at LSU, because it's a home game against a team that's kind of struggling. They got new blood, but Billy Napier is not going to be able to turn everything around by September 24th. So
the good thing about Death Valley though is that it's a day game, so that's going to be good. And we ain't playing at night.
Right. Absolutely. But averaged 40 points a game. And you were very balanced a season ago. I mean, I'm looking at the notes here. I mean, 218 rushing yards, 257 through the air, averaging we're at 475. And I think that offense is going to be as good, if not better. So once again, like I said, defense, and maybe I'm forgetting that when I'm going, 9 wins. But I do agree with the projection. I think around 8 should be able to get, if not 9. I think 9 would be kind of on the top end of that, but it depends on what you do at LSU. We're going to, just like at Mississippi State, we'll go ahead and say Alabama and Georgia lost. Now, I know at Tennessee that's not acceptable. And I understand that. You should be more competitive than that. I get that. But right now, just considering Alabama and Georgia, they're the kings of the SEC as far as just straight across talent, depth, all that kind of stuff, coaching. Josh Heupel, it's hard to rate him at this point. I think he's what Tennessee needs. I think he's going to do a good job at Tennessee. But I can't say Josh Heupel right now is a Nick Saban or a Kirby Smart. So I think Tennessee's going to have a great year, though. I mean, South Carolina, your last 3 games, Missouri, South Carolina, Vanderbilt, those should be games you should win and springboard you into a bowl game and into 2023. So it could be a really good year for Tennessee, and I think it will be.
We got a really good recruiting class coming in for next year too. With the
and a lot of times you don't register these guys anymore. A lot of guys are get out there. Your first SEC game is 3 weeks in, or 4th weekend, and then your first SEC road game is 5 weeks in. So that's a chance to kind of get some guys acclimated to college football and ready to help you out in SEC play.
Yeah, I'm excited to see the defense. I'm excited to see the offense too, but I'm excited to see the defense because they've got some guys. Last year at linebacker, we were so thin. We had guys get hurt, and we literally had three guys that played all year long. And now they've got they've got some depth. They've got some guys back from injury. They've got guys that have been in the system for another year, and they've got some depth. And I think that's going to help tremendously because that's what was happening last year. We would hang with. I mean, we even did decent, as good as anybody else against Georgia and Alabama. But man, to come 3rd and 4th quarter, our depth, we didn't have none, and our guys in the 4th quarter just exhausted. So.
Why it's good to get a guy like Jeremy Banks back, but at the same time, no wonder he ran 28 tackles.
Yeah,
had to play some.
Yeah, and then when you're playing defense across from our offense, where they either score or get off the field in 30 seconds. So you're playing. There's a lot of times the defense is playing 90 to 100 snaps, and
that's fair
in a game. And that's crazy.
Well, yeah, and a lot of defenses will get, what's wrong with you guys? Well, when you have a team offensively, like you said, it'll score, let's say in 3 plays, sometimes in 2 plays, that can be very frustrating because your defense gets off the field. And defense it's going to take more out of a defense physically, as far, even when you're in shape, as far as more than it is an offense. It is the way it is. And when you don't have depth on defense, you're huffing and puffing. You got to go back out there. And it's easy to put those hands on those hips and just lose your step. And so it just depends on some of this depth. You mentioned linebackers got a little bit more depth. I'm just really eager to see what this defense can do. I think they'll be better than a season ago, just for that factor, depth-wise.
Yeah, I'm excited to see the back end of that defense too. They've got several transfers in. Kamal Haddon, Turnage. Walker, there's another one I can't remember his name, but there's 4 of them, 2 safeties and 2 corner, and they're going to be in the mix. And now I think we're going to have a little bit of depth in the defensive backfield because in the last year we had 2 corners and that was it. I mean Alontae Taylor opted out for the bowl game. And we had to play, and you've seen what happened. Yeah. I mean, it was atrocious. The coverage in the secondary.
State. I mean, Texas Tech threw the ball all over MSU, ran the ball. It was like, where's this defense? And now I think State's defense is going to be better. They've got more depth, like you mentioned with Tennessee as well. Transfers, you mentioned that, getting those safeties, secondary in. That is going to be the big key too nowadays, because what you're looking at some teams, if you're not up to date on who they brought in, and sometimes those can come up even after spring practice, somebody transfer in. Also, you're like, oh, who's this person? And I mean, folks at home in the stands, you're going to have to keep rosters near you this year trying to figure out who's who. And you're like, wait a minute, I didn't know that guy from LSU transferred into Tennessee or Tennessee to LSU or this, that, and the other. I mean, you see, I know I've seen it a lot in women's basketball, crossovers, transfers, and transferring to rivals. States had that happen in women's basketball and in football where someone is transferred to the rival, Ole Miss. And so you're like, well, you scratch your head, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. So it's the world we live in, college football now, and I don't see it changing anytime soon. So who's on your roster this year may not be on your roster next year. And there's a lot of factors that go into it. Playing time, maybe they don't like the coach, or maybe they don't like teammates. I've heard of situations like that too. Somebody transfers out because this person's coming back and they think they're a cancer in the locker room and they don't want to deal with it. So they go somewhere else. There's a lot of factors in why these kids move around.
Yep. And you were talking about coaches, that, I mean, now not only are you going to have to be recruiting new players to come into your program, you almost have to recruit your own players all of the time.
Absolutely.
To keep them there, Yeah.
It's the first thing Sam Purcell said to me, the new women's basketball coach at Mississippi State, when I sat and had dinner with him, met with him. He said, man, the first thing I do is come in and recruit this team, these players that were here, because they could easily say, okay, well, I don't know who the coach is going to be, this, that, and the other. Maybe now I've heard the coach and I don't really know much about him yet. Maybe I should jump in the transfer portal, because they're getting anxious because, you had a May 1st deadline to be in the transfer portal to be eligible if you transferred within the SEC, last year. So, Sam got hired in March, but that puts a lot of pressure on ADs to try to make sure they have the right coach in place, but also getting a coach in place very quickly to make sure you retain the players you have. And State didn't have a lot of depth in women's basketball a season ago, and we saw it rear its ugly head a lot. They had a really good interim coach in Doug Novak who did a great job with X's and O's and keeping them in games. But they were in some games you're like, how? And so, but they bring a core back. I know we've kind of jumped to women's basketball. Football's here. But yeah, I'm really excited about football. I get excited about college football, number one. I love the New Orleans Saints. I like the Tennessee Titans. So I keep up with the NFL. But a lot of times I'll sit and watch games, but I'm not going to watch every game that's on TV unless I try to watch the New Orleans Saints as much as possible. So, but yeah, college football, it's here. College sports is the best. Even with the changes, you may not like the transfer portal. You may not like NIL. I realize it's out of control in some ways because some of this NIL stuff is not necessarily what NIL means and what it's written up for. And until the NCAA comes in and ratifies it, they had an opportunity to put some things in place before it went into law in a lot of these states on July 1st of 2021. They didn't do it. And so now it's kind of like something's got to be done. But regardless of all the changes and what you may not like college football, for me, college football is still college football. There's still that orange tee on that white helmet. There's still that M-State logo on the side of that glossy maroon helmet. There's still the beautiful powder blues at Ole Miss with the script Ole Miss in red on it. That LSU helmet, which is hard to top, as far as the best looking college football helmet. So I'm a helmet guy, as you can tell. All that collection.
Yeah, I couldn't tell with all the ones in the background, but I know you've been collecting those for years. So,
right. So I need I need to rent some storage space for them, but still, it's college athletics. I love college athletics. Even in the changes, it's still the best to me. It's my favorite, and I always get fired up about it, and I'm blessed to be able to be a broadcaster in it and be around it and see the behind-the-scenes stuff, be a part of that 13-year-old Jason would be really, really thoroughly impressed with 44-year-old Jason right now.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That was my next question. You're talking about broadcasting. So how is East Mississippi going to be this year?
Won't quote the source, but I'm being told that if they can gel, they can win a national championship. This team went undefeated a season ago and had some issues at quarterback. Jamari Jones showed some flashes of being really good, and he showed some flashes of making mistakes. They've got some new coaches in, but they've got a wealth of talent, and they lost in double overtime of the first round of the MAC-JC playoffs, or the MAC playoffs. It's no longer MAC-JC, it's the MAC, which is Mississippi Association of community colleges. So they also like 42-41 because Buddy went for 2 trying to end the game. I'm not saying that was the wrong call.
I like that. I like that call. I like having guts.
Well, it's worked for him before. I mean, he did that in a state championship game of 2017 on the road against Northwest, a team that will win a national championship when EMCC is down or kicked out of the playoffs. No, Northwest is a great, respectful program. They won it in 2015 when the EMCC was booted out of the state playoffs, and which essentially ended their season. EMCC was by far the best team. They had beaten Garner Minshew and Northwest by like 3 touchdowns in Scuba. But regardless, I'm not going to say asterisk. EMCC didn't get put in. That has nothing to do with Northwest. Congratulations. They won the national championship. But we were at Northwest, and I remember thinking, oh, my gosh, my heart was pounding. I can't remember the score, but it had gone to like right before they made you go for 2, and I can't remember what overtime it was, but it was a high-scoring game. And all of a sudden, I look over the color, and it's like, my goodness, Buddy's going for 2. Oh, goodness, here we go. And your heart starts to race because you want that state championship because that's what's going to put you, in the national championship game. EMCC wins that. They're in the national championship game. They lose that game. They're not playing anywhere because it's not like, they've got a bowl. There are some bowls, but EMCC doesn't do that. They'll go to like the national championship. So he calls the play is basically quarterback rolls to the right, and I'm sitting here going, oh my goodness. And they run a drag route, and everybody comes towards the ball when they're faking a run to the right, and he throws back across the field. And I thought, if this kid drops this ball, because he was absolutely wide open and on the left side of the end zone, and I'm doing like this as I'm standing up because here it is. And if he drops it, season's over. He catches it. EMCC is going to win the national championship because nobody can hang with him, the next game. So he caught it, and the side that we were on just explodes because the press box for the road team, there's 2 different press boxes. They got one for the road team. So it's for the clock operators, coaches, for the opponents, and then radio broadcast booth. The place shook. And Bo Wallace, who's a Tennessee native who played at EMCC and then Ole Miss, was an assistant on that team. I think he was quarterback's coach. And he about knocked our spotter down coming through from the coach's box through the radio booth to get out there to celebrate with the team. So that was a gutsy call. And they asked Buddy in the post-game interview, hey, why that call? He said, the pizza was getting cold. I was hungry. I don't like cold pizza. Pizza's getting cold. So, that's classic Buddy. And that infuriates, opponents and a lot of people like, oh, that's so disrespectful to say. Well, it's Buddy Stevens, and I thought it was funny. But he's my coach, so.
Yeah, but Buddy is really, really fun to listen to. I enjoy watching that show. Are they have any? They going to do that again?
No, that's done. I don't foresee them coming back in the near future, if ever. But funny story on Buddy Stevens. So I interviewed Buddy game day, usually anywhere between 9:30 and 11 o'clock over the phone, and we'll have chit chat conversation because he and I are friends. And when it's a Saturday game, sometimes you can't get him on Thursday because their schedule changes and stuff. So I was calling him. He wouldn't answer his phone. Called him, wouldn't answer his phone. Sent him text. Never heard back from him. And it's getting to where it's Friday afternoon. And I'm like, excuse me. I was like, I don't have time to do the interview now because I've got high school football. I had a game that night, school board show, and then it's get up, do MSU game day at 7:30 in the morning because we had an 11 o'clock kickoff. And so that's crazy when EMCC has a Saturday game, which is rare. It's usually homecoming or playoffs. So it's airwaves are filled. We go on at 7:30 with MSU game day after our FCA show. And then there's the game. And then after the game, we come right on with the EMCC broadcast. We don't do a pregame show because usually kickoffs around 2. And then the Mississippi State game will end and we'll go straight live from Scuba or wherever we go. So long story short, there was no time to interview him before the game. And so I let our SID know, and it's like, I've tried. And a lot of times he's on a Friday night school board show to preview if he's on a Saturday or look back at the games on Thursday night. So I never got Buddy on the air. He never answered my call or my text. So no big deal. I didn't get upset about it. I said, we won't have him on the pregame show. No big deal. The things happen. So I'm up in the radio booth and I send it to our sideline reporter. And I was like, EMCC leads at the half. Let's go down to whoever it was, who has Buddy Stevens standing by. And so the guy's like, we were up 45-0, something like that at the half. I mean, it was ugly. So he asked you, he said, buddy, what do you tell your team at the half? He put the microphone in his face and he goes, we just got to get better. I just got to coach it better. He's being sarcastic. He's like, I got to coach it better. Our coach has got to coach it better. And I'm like, we're up 45-0. And then he goes, and obviously I got to get better at radio interviews because I wasn't good enough to be on the pregame show today, but I'll work on that. And I'm like, let me tell you, I was hot. I was not a happy camper at all. I'm like, why did he get you on the radio show? So it ended up being kind of there was some people not happy about what he said. So post game, I'm on the field and I'm talking to a recruit that was from French camp, on the fence. He had been across the fence. But anyway, long story short, I started hearing my name called out. It's Buddy. Jason, come here. I was like, he's probably going to chew me out. I'm going to chew him back because I tried to call him and I'm going to show him proof. Chew him back with respect because I don't want Buddy. Buddy could beat me up. So I get over there close to him. He puts his arm around. He's like, hey, why didn't you call me last night? I said, I have tried to call you. I've been trying to call you since Thursday morning. Some passionate Jason comes out. He's like, I'm sorry about that. And then we let it go. We went on to another topic, and I never addressed how he embarrassed me by saying he wasn't good enough to be on the pregame show and wasn't getting a phone call and I didn't interview him. I'm like, come on, buddy. But that's classic Buddy Stevens. He's being fun. And he keeps me in stitches a lot of times. I get on the phone with him and we'll talk for sometimes 45 minutes to an hour. That's rare because he's got a lot to do with coaching a football team, but he's got a lot of funny sayings and what you see is what you get. On Last Chance U, people have asked me, is that really Buddy Stevens? And I'll say, yes, but I get more of the fun, friendly Buddy Stevens, not the serious, hey, you gotta fire off the ball. You gotta shed your blocks. You gotta just, not all that intense, stressful stuff. I get the fun side of it. Like driving his golf cart and hitting one of the tackling dummies, and just sends it sailing. No, I get that side of Buddy. Buddy's got a great sense of humor. I defend Buddy. And ever since Last Chance U, I've defended Buddy a lot.
I gotta imagine that was pretty fun though, to do that, to be on, something that's that big and I mean, I'm sure you may have been nervous on a few things, but I'm not sure that, how that worked or how they filmed or if they put it all together later and just threw your voice across it, or you knew it was going on at the time, or, I don't know how all of that worked, but I got to imagine that it was a lot of fun.
The first season they took off our radio broadcast or all online, or I forgot how they did it. The second season, because they had some audio issues, it didn't sound as clear or to their liking. So they went where the second season, we had an audio engineer that before every game came in and plugged right into our system. And so I don't know if it recorded right into the cameras. So when they had the not raw audio, the B-roll, so to speak, in TV language. So when they had all their film, I don't know if it had the radio voice on there, had to go back and dub it. I'm not really certain how they did that, but basically it was a distraction. I don't mean that in a negative way because they were great to work with, production crew for Netflix. One Potato Productions, Greg Whiteley, who is the creator, founder, writer, everything of the show. And I say writer, he made sure the edits were what he wanted. All the interviews and the questions that he asked, he kind of controlled the narrative a little bit when they would do interviews. And I mean that in a good way, not a bad way, but they knew the angle they wanted and what they wanted to include. They were great to work with, but sometimes you would turn like this, and they never used this in Last Chance U, any radio booth footage, but sometimes they would come in there and you'd have two cameras. One would be on me, and one time I looked like this and the camera's really like right here. And I was like, whoa, so I didn't know they were in there. And so you kind of peeked over and you're like, oh, just ignore them, because they would say ignore the cameras. But mentally, it was hard to ignore them. And then you'd hear the door shut and they were out, and you would look down on the field and there's like cameramen everywhere. So that got to Buddy a little bit. I don't think when he signed up for that, I know there was a lot of times, I don't want to tell too much family business, but there were a lot of times where I think Buddy tried to limit access that was agreed upon before the contract was signed. But I don't think Buddy realized how much they were going to be around and everything. And I think it was a mutual parting after season 2. I think Buddy kind of wanted them gone respectfully. And I think they were tired of working with Buddy respectfully. And that's kind of what I'm getting from both sides. It was kind of like, you know what? It's probably best we move on and fret. But people didn't want that. They wanted a season 3 of EMCC. And Buddy would get frustrated because, and I could tell this, he wouldn't mind. He told me, he said, it's frustrating because every time in season 2, every time my voice would raise or this, that, and the other, here comes 10 cameras. You know, he over-exaggerated, but he said, they're all swarming around him, wanting to catch me saying something, whatever. And I said, Buddy, here's the reason. I was like, man, you were gold. I'm like, because you were a character. And that became, after season 1, your anger and this, that, and the other. I told him this. I said, that was what they wanted. I mean, that's the conflict in any kind of people. That's what movies and plays and stuff, there's always conflict resolution. What happened in 2015 could not have been anything scripted any better for Netflix and Last Chance U than that season be cut off because of a fight. So it was a cliffhanger. Oh my goodness. What happened? We can't wait to see 2016. And then there was all those suspended players where EMCC had to go on the road to Jones and play without every play, all freshmen or newcomers. So if you were transferred from Tennessee or Georgia, you got to play, or a transfer from somebody else, or a freshman. And a freshman quarterback, nonetheless, had to go in there, and EMCC lost by 2 against a really good Jones team. So I knew then they had another great team, but would they win the national championship? Because even though they won the state championship that year, that loss kept them out of the national championship. So they essentially lost 2 national championships, in my opinion, because of that one fight. But I told him, they're not trying to make you out to be the villain. They're just filming stuff, and people either loved you or hated you, but nonetheless, you were entertainment.
They watched.
Whether you loved or
that's why they were watching.
Why they were watching. So essentially, and then they tried to get that guy, Jason Brown from Independence. He was kind of a character himself. I think they tried to pick a place that they could go to kind of match that and have a villain. And his cussing was way worse than Buddy Stevens. His actions were way worse than Buddy Stevens. Buddy was more professional, put together than Jason Brown. And so Netflix, the ratings started to kind of slip. But people wanted more of EMCC. They still get people come to games from Europe.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Every week, I could go back on YouTube, not to critique myself, or which you should do, go back and say, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? I don't have time for that. But I do go on and try to clip some highlights for other sports programs like our Friday Night Scoreboard show when I go over our JUCO scores. And you can see on the side all the comments and people talking about the game and stuff. And sometimes it's the broadcast, like, hey, no audio. What happened to the audio? Something like that. Or, hey, that's not such and such. They keep calling that by name. And I'm like, yeah, I know, I messed that up. When you got a 34 and 24 that run in and out, it can be easy when you're looking at your color analyst or looking at a stat, you look up and they're snapping the ball to not see that the running backs changed out. But regardless, you'll see Go Lions from Brazil. You'll see foreign language you can't read, but you'll read the country. Maybe it says Germany, or watching in France, or very, very popular outside the United States was Last Chance U. And they still gravitate towards EMCC because of the first 2 seasons. It was a lot of fun. It could be distracting. Yeah, it was a little nerve-wracking because you knew they were recording and what are they going to use, what are they not going to use, and that sort of thing. You want to make sure you said the right thing and all that stuff. But it was a very, very fun experience that had me interviewed by ESPN for a piece that they did on it. So it kind of put you a little bit in the spotlight, so to speak. So
I know you were, you were famous, but I didn't know you were world famous, so
I would say famous. Here's the thing. There's a lot of people, so I won't say I'm famous. There's a lot of people that they'll know that voice, or, oh, you're that guy on Last Chance U, but I wasn't a main character. I had somebody like Buddy Stevens, Ronald Ollie, DJ Law, all these characters, or Brittany Wagner. I saw Brittany in Omaha at the College World Series last year. Tennessee fans will love this. It was game 3 of the College World Series finals when Mississippi State beat Vanderbilt, blew them out 9-0 to win the national championship. And during that game, first couple of innings, I saw Brittany Wagner. I kept looking at this person like, she's famous. Like, where do I know her? It was weird because I was like, that's a famous girl, but I'm trying to think of who she is, and it dawned on me when she turned, looked at me and started waving and said, "Hey." I said, "That's Brittany Wagner." So I went down and talked to her. Some other people, I think, throughout the game had recognized who she was and wanted to go talk to her. She was very popular from the show. So now Brittany, not in fairness, I knew Brittany mainly through the show. She had come on a broadcast with me. We knew of each other. She knew I was Jason Crowder, radio announcer. And I mean, we recognized each other. We saw each other. But during the show is where I really kind of knew who she was in full. I knew she was the academic person, but I got to see what she did, what the day was like for her, and this, that, and the other. So we weren't like, so that's why I recognized her, but you know, like, she's famous. I've seen her before. The show brought on a lot of excitement about EMCC, and it was a cool experience for me, for sure.
Well, that sounds like it was a lot of fun, but I'm going to shift gears again one more time. So we talked about the SEC. Okay. So what do you think the rest of college football, who out in college football might have something for the SEC this year in the Pac-12? You know, I think some people are thinking Lincoln Riley's going to do something at USC, but I still think it's going to be a first year, so I don't think that's possible. Ohio State, they always seem to find a way to lose one they shouldn't early and then try to fight their way back all year long. Clemson, I just don't think they got the quarterback right now. So who is, and Oklahoma, I have no idea what they're going to be. So who do you think who's going to be maybe somebody that might be able to come up and contend with Alabama and Georgia?
I think you always have to say Ohio State in a way, because they're a safe bet, because they get some of the best talent in the land outside the SEC. I think you're disagreeing with big time. I understand their team should go undefeated in the Big Ten every year and stuff. But I think Ohio State, I think they're always a safe bet when you're really not sure, because I'm really not sure. I think I'm going to go back to some of the teams you mentioned. USC, I think they're going to look better offensively, but still year one. Clemson, they kind of dipped a little bit, still weren't bad a season ago. And I think people, because they weren't undefeated in the playoffs, were looking at them as, Clemson's, their reign of the ACC and this, that, and the other's over. No, not necessarily. Keep an eye on Miami. Now, I don't think that they're going to this year contend for a national championship, but keep an eye on them in the future. I think their talent's changing. Mario Cristobal knows what he's doing. And here's the thing. He played football at Mississippi's coach for Miami, was the strength and conditioning coach for Mario Cristobal at Oregon. He was at Georgia at one time. He's the handlebar mustache guy with the big muscles that you would always see on CBS when Georgia would play, and even with Oregon. So he's kind of famous himself. But he told me that Mario Cristobal wanted to do, when he took the job. Here, I hope you, because I'm phone call from somebody and I had to hit delete. There we go. Or sorry to who it was who had to ignore. I'll call you back. But anyhow, he said that when he was interviewing after the coach before Mario Cristobal had lost his job, he said, or left rather, to go to Florida State. I forgot his name. He said when he sat in the interview room, he just said this. He said, "Look, this is the way I do it. I have this much power, this much reign. This is the way it was done under Kirby Smart at Georgia. If you don't like that, then maybe I'm not the guy for you," so to speak. And he said that Mario Cristobal wanted to take a blueprint out of the SEC. And the way he was running things at Oregon was a lot like things were run at Georgia. And he wanted that. And he wanted my friend Aaron to stay on board as strength and conditioning coach, because he brought that SEC experience and that toughness and stuff. And he carried him with him to Miami. And so I think Miami could be a team that could contend in the future. Or some of the other teams you mentioned there. You talked about Ohio State. You talked about Clemson. I think we've talked about Oklahoma. Yeah, we don't know. Friend sent me a text. I remember when I was loved. I'm like, just because I didn't answer the phone. Anyway, so I think Oklahoma's got a lot of talent. Obviously, still they had some transfers out. Caleb Williams, Spencer Rattler. So you're like, where do we go from here? But they still have a lot of talent. I think Brent Venables is a really good coach. I think he'll prove to be a really good coach. Oklahoma football still Oklahoma. It's going to be a little tougher for them when they get in the SEC, but I just don't see Georgia and Alabama unless it's maybe an Ohio State. Whoever it is going to be a surprise to us. If it's anybody outside of those teams we mentioned, USC, no. I think it's going to be a surprise. Texas is not back. They're not going to contend for the national championship this year. They just can't overcome Georgia. And here's the thing. What's the Georgia quarterback situation look like? Okay, now.
He's not even mentioned in whenever you're talking about the best quarterbacks in the SEC. His name doesn't come up.
You know why Georgia won? Because
Defense.
Stetson, defense and a really, really talented rushing attack. They kind of had the blueprint of the old Alabamas, where your quarterback's not going to go out there and, you just do your job. People don't like the term game manager, but essentially that's kind of what Stetson Bennett was.
You don't have to win it, just don't lose it.
Stetson Bennett's better than people getting credit for, but I can understand their reserves of Stetson Bennett being the face of the Georgia football program. I understand that. Better than he gets credit for, better than he looks, because, he's kind of a short guy, kind of looks like a frat boy maybe. He just doesn't look like an athlete. Does that make sense?
Yes, yep, I agree.
At the third, does that make sense? So I don't mean that any disrespect to the poor kid, because he has a national championship. First time Georgia's won it since 1980. People talk about Herschel Walker. Now it's like Stetson Bennett still is his name is gonna go down in history because he was the starting quarterback for the national champions. And look, what's his name? I'm looking at him, was ready to come back and take over that role, but Stetson Bennett had got to a point where things were rolling with him that he never could take it over. And so credit Stetson Bennett for fighting him off. It's not like Stetson was taking over for an injured quarterback that was knocked out for the year, knocked out for majority of the games. But a part of it was things were rolling with Stetson, and Stetson was experienced at this point, had things rolling. He'd been practicing and doing all those things. So Georgia won it with defense, great rushing attack, and a quarterback that limited their mistakes.
Yep.
I don't know.
That's a recipe for success.
Absolutely. So, outside of Alabama and Georgia from the SEC, I don't know who else other than Ohio State. Michigan, are they really ready? I don't know that they're ready to contend. So it could be somebody. What if Mel Tucker at Michigan State just has this outstanding season? They make it the playoffs, and trying to think of some of the teams that were on the cusp a season ago. With the transfer portal,
I've got a sleeper. I got a sleeper for you.
Who?
Houston.
Agreed. And you know why we're not talking about Houston? Because they're not Power 5.
That's right. But
they're
watch them.
They're loaded, and they're coached by Dana Holgorsen, who is a fantastic coach. Left West Virginia not because he was fired, because he wanted to take the job at Houston. Matter of fact, I know their backup quarterback, Coleman Edwards, who's right here from my hometown, French Camp, real close to the kid. And, he speaks highly of the coaching staff, his players, and his teammates, I should say. And they're going to win the American. And I think, isn't this their final season in the American before they go to the Big 12? I think they're a Big 12 team next season.
Yeah, I believe it is.
So I've told Holman, I'm like, man, you're going to be a quarterback on a Big 12 team. Going to the Big 12 is one of the best things going to happen to Houston, because I think overall their athletics department is going to get better and better. This football team is old. I think they'll do well in the Big 12, because they're not going to be going up against Texas all the time and Oklahoma's. They can compete with Oklahoma States, the Kansas State, the Texas Techs, and who else is coming? BYU. They can compete with all those teams in Big 12, Central Florida. They'll be fine. They'll be fine. And you're right. Look out for Houston. How cool would that be to see a team like Houston be able to make it to the college football playoff? I'm rooting for it now. You said it. Now I'm rooting.
Yeah, if they do, I'm gonna have Holman on my podcast that week. So
we'll make sure that happens. You got time with Holman a little bit this summer. We're down at the beach and ride on the boat. How much fun was that?
Oh, that was awesome when them dolphins were out there, and man, that was
absolutely.
Jennifer had a blast. She really loved that. So yeah, I thank you for that, and I appreciate you, and thank you for everything that you're doing for college football. And I enjoy listening to you on the radio. I enjoy hanging out with you when we get to go to the beach. When are we going to the beach again?
Sometime next spring and next summer. How's that sound?
That sounds good.
We're going to make 2 trips.
2 trips? Oh, wow.
Great. Right. Hey, by the way, yeah, I didn't even talk about the national thing that I'm supposed to do a couple of times this year. Where my schedule allows, I'm going to try to be a part of Gridiron Sports Network. And I've been asked to do some color and some sideline for that. Over 130 stations nationwide, and Sirius XM, I believe, is signing on a big station in New York, in Manhattan, is going to be carrying college football. And one of the games I'm going to be doing is Houston at Memphis, and I'll be doing sideline for Texas A&M and Mississippi State in Starkville. And there's a couple of other games on the table. I just got to make sure that my schedule doesn't conflict, and I can sign the dotted line and be a part of those games as well. So excited about what's coming up this football season.
Congratulations, man. That sounds awesome. Sounds awesome.
I'm really thrilled about it and really excited. And I'm also getting to take our local pregame show, Michigan Game Day, on the road. I'm going to Tucson, Arizona. I've been to Arizona, never been to the University of Arizona and Tucson. So excited to go kind of get a little Pac-12 feel.
Well, that sounds awesome, man, and I'm excited. I can't wait for September. September is my favorite month out of the year, so I am ready to go. It's almost here. I had a blast talking to you today, Jason. Thank you for everything you do, and thank you for coming on with me today. Thanks for your friendship, and this is going to do it for today on the Real Deal Podcast with Todd Hearn.